let's move on to our next video. That is, if you have the courage to stay until the end. The flashlight beam died exactly when Raul did that choked little cough. Not a cough from a cold, a cough that meant air had suddenly become poison. We were already halfway out of the designated area, hip deep in the thickest, blackest mud you could imagine. The cold had a metallic taste, like licking a frozen car battery. It wasn't the natural chill of the Canadian autumn. It was a specific, wet, heavy cold that felt like it had traveled miles just to settle under your clothes. Natalia was whispering, maybe praying, maybe just trying to regulate the frantic rhythm of her breathing. I could hear every ragged inhale, every shuddering exhale, amplified by the suffocating silence of the forest. "I told you, Raul," I hissed, but the words evaporated before they hit the moss. "I told you we should have waited for morning." He didn't answer. He just pointed.
A beam of his backup light, weak, yellow and sputtering, got the tree line. It wasn't those trees that mattered. It was what was on them. High up, maybe 9 feet off the ground, where no deer or typical predator could reach. The bark was stripped, not chewed, not gnawed, slashed, deep, clean gouges that had pulled the cambium layer right off the trunk, and below it, dripping slowly onto the layer of wet earth, was something thick and sticky that wasn't sap. It smelled like a butcher shop floor left out in the heat, iron, rot, and something else, musk, strong enough to burn the sinuses. "There?" Natalia asked, her voice barely a thread. I shook my head instantly. I grew up in these woods. Bears bite, they claw, they tear. They don't leave marks that look like they were made by 5 curved razor-sharp blades wielded by something that stands upright. I remember thinking, this is too clean, too intentional.
Then Raul took me a step back. His foot hit something softy, heavy, hidden beneath the decaying leaves. He didn't scream. He just made that awful, wet, snap noise again. We focused the 2 failing lights down. That's when we saw Max. Max was Caio's dog, a Rottweiler mix, 80 pounds of pure muscle and bark. He'd gone missing 2 days before the first incident, just vanished into thin air while we were setting up the cabin. What was left of Max wasn't recognizable as a dog. It was a ruin. The torso was there, but the limbs looked wrenched, not bitten. The head was turned completely around, facing backward, as if something incredibly fast and incredibly strong had twisted it off its axis in a single, precise movement. The strangest detail wasn't the mutilation, though. It was the complete lack of blood around the body. The ground was saturated near the body, soaking into the dark soil, but the carcass itself seemed drained, cleaned.
Natalia gasped, a sound to rip the silence like canvas. She spun around, tripping over a root, and scrambled back toward the cabin path. "Run!" I choked out, pushing Raul forward. "We need to get to the cabin, now!" Raul, usually the fastest of us, wasn't running. He was stumbling, his legs locked up. He looked down at his own chest, then back at the Max's remains. "Did you hear that?" Raul whispered. I hadn't heard anything, just Natalia's desperate scrambling. "Hear what, Raul? Just run!" No, not out here. Before, when we were heading down the ridge, he insisted, his eyes wide and vacant. I heard something imitating Caio's voice, calling Max. That low, whistling tone he uses. My blood turned to ice. Animals don't imitate. Predators don't use lures. This was wrong. This was a cognitive level of horror we hadn't prepared for. We didn't debate it. The silent realization that we were being hunted by something intelligent was enough. We sprinted.
The cabin wasn't safety. Era just a wooden box waiting to be opened. We slammed the door, bolted the rusty latch, and piled a stack of firewood against it. The thick, dusty air inside was marginally better than the toxic air outside. Kaio was sitting exactly where we had left him, in the center of the dusty living room, clutching an antique rifle that looked more ornamental than functional. He was staring at the window, not seeing the darkness, but seeing something much worse behind it. "Max is back," Kaio stated flatly, without looking at us. We froze. Natalia was leaning against the door, hyperventilating. "Kaio, Max isn't—" "No, I know Max is dead," he interrupted, his voice hollow. "I smelled the iron when you opened the door, but it followed you. It's out there. I can feel it pacing the perimeter. This cabin was built in the early 1900s. Thick logs, small windows, sturdy enough to hold off a blizzard, but not a siege.
We stopped away for some every single pane of glass we could find, nailing particle board over the wood frames. The hammering was loud, a desperate, defiant noise in the overwhelming silence. That's when the silence broke. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a growl. It was a thump, not against the door, not against the windows. It was right above us, on the roof. We stopped hammering instantly. The sound of our own hearts was suddenly deafening. The cabin had a steeply pitched roof, covered in old, warped shingles. Whatever landed up there wasn't falling, it was landing with intent. Thump. It was heavy, immensely heavy, and it was moving. We could hear the distinct sound of massive claws, not nails, scraping against the hard, brittle wood, pacing the length of the ridge. "It's walking," Natalia whispered, her eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. "It's standing." I tried to rationalize it. Raccoons, possums, a very large, confused mountain lion. But the rhythm was wrong.
It was too deliberate, too human in its gait, yet far too heavy for any man. It sounded like someone walking in lead boots, testing the structural integrity of the ceiling. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Then the sound stopped, directly over the central living space where we were huddled. We waited. Then 30 seconds, a full minute of paralyzed silence, thick with the smell of wet dog and fear. Then a new sound, a grinding. It was trying to find a way in. It wasn't scratching the wood, it was trying to pry the rafters apart. Kaio slowly raised the antique rifle. The action clicked loudly, jarringly. "Don't," I mouthed. "It knows we're here. Don't let it know we're armed." Kaio ignored me. His eyes were no longer vacant. They were burning with a kind of desperate, cornered rage. Suddenly, the pacing resumed, faster now. Thump, thump, thump. It raced across the roof toward the far corner, near the attic vent.
"It's looking for the weakest spot," Natalia breathed, tears blurring her vision. We stared up. The ceiling groaned, protesting the unnatural weight. Dust and tiny flakes of dry rot showered down. Then came the smell again, hitting us with the force of a physical blow. The hot, rotten, sulfuric scent of the creature itself, pouring down through the attic seams. We knew instinctively that the attack wasn't coming from the ground floor, it was coming from above. "The attic access," Kaio shouted, stumbling backward toward the small bolted hatch in the far corner of the kitchen. "It's unsecured." We scrambled, pushing past each other. The hatch was locked with a simple sliding bolt. It was the structural equivalent of a paperclip. I reached the bolt first, my fingers slick with cold sweat, fumbling for the tiny metal tab. That's when the thing on the roof stopped moving.
The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the terrifying absence of all sound, like the air itself had been vacuumed out of the room. And then a sound that made my chest cavity feel like it was collapsing. It was a sigh, a long, slow, rattling exhale that came not from the vent, but seemed to travel right through the wood, settling over us like a shroud. It was definitely a breath, but too massive, too deep, too full of gravel and wet throat to be anything human. It knew we were at the hatch. It had been waiting, and then the blow landed. It wasn't a scrape or a tear. It was a focused, vertical smash directly over the hatch cover. The wooden plank cracked with a sound like a pistol shot, splintering outwards. The bolt I was holding shattered, spitting hot metal shards into my face. We dove away as the hatch flew open, slamming against the ceiling above. For a brief, agonizing second, the cabin was flooded not just with the rotten smell, but with moonlight.
In that opening, standing openly against a pale, unforgiving light of the moon, was a silhouette. It was impossibly tall, its shoulders broad enough to fill the entire opening. Its shape was wrong. It was the form of a man, lean and powerful, but overlaid with thick, bristling fur, the color of wet cinder, the head tilted, not out of curiosity, but out of calculation. The eyes, twin points of light reflecting the moonlight, were low, set deep into a snout that was long and terrifyingly canine. It paused, letting us absorb the sheer impossibility of its existence, letting us understand that the sound we thought was an animal was actually this. And then, with a speed that defied its massive size, it dropped. We screamed. Natalia didn't just scream. It was a high, thin wail of pure, unadulterated terror, and she threw her hands up, instinctively trying to ward off a monster that was already halfway through the ceiling. A stench that watered the rotten dog ozone filled the tiny kitchen. The last thing I saw before I blindly yanked Natalia and Caio away was the sight of those claws, long, black, curved like scythes, reaching down, tearing through the thin, splintered wood. I don't know how we got out of the kitchen, only that we scrambled toward the single rickety back door leading to the woodshed. Thump. It had landed. We heard the floorboards shudder under its weight. We heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps close in the distance behind us. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't chasing us. It was simply walking. It knew exactly where we were going. It was enjoying the hunt. We were already halfway out the back door when I looked back. The dogman, because that's the only word that fit the horrifying reality, was standing in the kitchen doorway. It hadn't moved fast. It had simply waited for us to panic. It looked at us. In the low light filtering through the broken hatch, I saw the impossible. Its muzzle didn't just snarl. It formed a perfect, silent, horrifying smile. Then it crouched, its muscles tightening, ready to spring the few feet across the room to where we stood frozen. We made it into the woodshed, slamming the door, but we knew the lock would hold for maybe 3 seconds. We were trapped between the creature inside and the cold, hostile forest outside. There was a heavy bolt on the inside of the woodshed door. I yanked it, desperately trying to secure the flimsy wood. But the moment the bolt clicked home, a noise came from behind us. Not the sound of the creature outside, but a sound from the woodshed itself. A soft, scraping sound, like something dragging metal across concrete. We spun around, shining the weak light.
The woodshed wasn't empty, and whatever was hiding in the darkest corner was much, much closer than the thing we had just fled.
If you think this is over, you're wrong. The woodshed was just the beginning. Subscribe now and come back for part 2. The terror has just begun. The sound wasn't a growl. It was a cough. Human and wet. We froze. Natalia's breath hitched. A thin, whistling sound that broke the otherwise heavy, oppressive silence. The forest floor was still soaked with the drizzle that had started at dusk, but the smell of pine and wet earth was overpowered by something else. Ozone and the sickening, metallic tang of fresh blood. "It's wounded," Kaio whispered, his voice too high, too close to breaking. He was shivering, not just from the cold that was leaching into the cabin walls, but from a deeper tremor. Raoul, usually the steady one, just gripped the rusty wrench tighter. His knuckles were white against the pitted metal. He kept staring at the dark tree line, where the last of the cabin dogs had disappeared hours ago.
We'd seen his tracks earlier, huge, paw-like, but with a strange heel drag that suggested immense weight trying to walk upright. We wanted it to be a bear. We needed it to be a bear, but bears don't cough like that. Not like a man drowning on his own lungs. The false hope, that dangerous, flickering delusion we cling to when facing the impossible, told us it was over. The thing had done its damage and retreated. Maybe it had killed something bigger than the dog. Maybe it was a rare, aggressive wolf hybrid, and the blood loss would make it weak. We locked the rickety cabin door, stacked the 2 flimsy chairs against it, and spent the night waiting for the sunrise. The darkness pressing on our eyes like thick cotton. The moment the weak, watery sun filtered through the gaps in the window shutters, we moved, not to escape, but because we had to see what was left of the wreckage. That's the thing about terror. Sometimes the unknown is worse than the sight of the horror itself.
We followed the trail of smashed undergrowth, stepping carefully over patches of slick, dark fluid that wasn't just water. Raoul stopped suddenly, holding his hand up, signaling silence. Look, near a cluster of ancient, twisted oaks, the tracks changed. They weren't dragging anymore. They were deliberate, deeply impressed into the mud, leading straight toward the old abandoned hunting shack about 50 yards away. But what made me swallow the air in my throat was what lay between the tracks. It was Kaio's favorite ball, the one his old border collie, Buster, used to carry everywhere. It wasn't just torn. It was neatly placed on a smooth gray rock, and beside it, a small, intricate coil of Buster's long black fur, not shed, but clipped. That broke the animal narrative completely. Animals don't display trophies. Animals don't arrange things. This thing isn't just killing, Natalia said, her voice thin as glass. It's playing.
The stench hitting us then. A mixture of sulfur, decaying meat, is something else. A musky, animalistic stink that burned the back of the nose. He was coming from the hunting shack. Raoul didn't hesitate. He had to know. We were standing at the point of no return. We couldn't go back to the cabin knowing this intelligence was lurking just beyond our sight. And we couldn't leave without understanding what we were up against. The shack was worse than dilapidated. He was collapsing, leaning precariously against a stand of dead aspens. The air inside was thick, cold, and utterly dead. The floor was just packed dirt, but along the back wall, someone or something had dug out a shallow depression, almost like a massive nest. This wasn't a den. This was a lair. The macabre clues started there. We found bones, yes,
But not just random animal parts. They were arranged. Femurs and ribs, polished clean, were stacked into a low, crude pyramid shape in one corner.
Near the pyramid, there was a collection of objects that made my stomach revolt. Pieces of reflective metal, broken glass, and 3 faded dog collars, all belonging to pets that had disappeared from the surrounding farms over the last few months. It wasn't hunting for food, it was hunting for parts. Then Natalia saw it, a dark, dried splatter high up on the wall, near the cracked ceiling beam. It was too high for a bear to reach, too high for any normal human. "Raoul," she whispered, her eyes wide, locked on the ceiling. "How tall is this thing?" We didn't answer. We didn't need to. We realized this thing wasn't just standing up, it was reaching. And in that moment, the true horror set in. This wasn't some mythic creature from folklore. It was something disturbingly evolved, hiding in plain sight, using our own rational expectations, bear, wolf, as a shield. Suddenly, the false hope evaporated entirely.
A sun outside was shining weakly, but the shadows in the shack felt eternal. We thought we were safe during the day. We were wrong. We heard the sound of a rock scraping outside, a slow, deliberate movement, not running, walking. We froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to break free. The sound wasn't a panicked retreat, it was an approach. It knew we were in the shack. It had probably watched us walk right into its home. Raoul gripped the wrench. Natalia grabbed a splintered plank of wood. I pulled Caio behind me, trying to make myself a shield, feeling his frantic, shallow breaths on my back. The shack wall, thin and rotten plywood, shuddered violently. Not a bump, a push. We heard the heavy inhale of air, wet and ragged, just centimeters from our faces, separated only by that flimsy wood. The smell intensified, rotting meat, wet fur, and the metallic sharpness of pure aggression. Then, a sound that confirmed the nightmare. Claws.
Not sharp nails, but thick, curved talons, being dragged slowly and deliberately down the wood paneling. Scratch, drag, scratch. Like a knife across bone. "It's playing with us," Raoul muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Caio screamed, not a pain scream, but a deep, primal sound of pure, helpless terror. The shadow fell over the single broken window, massive, impossibly tall, blotting out the already weak sunlight. The creature wasn't attacking with full force yet. It was testing the material, enjoying the realization that we were trapped. Raoul knew we were dead if we stayed. He saw the only exit, a small, broken section of wall near the back where a heavy windstorm had taken out a beam. "When I count 3, he choked out. "Run." 1. The claws stopped dragging. We heard the massive body shift, preparing to strike. 2. The wooden doorframe on the other side of the shack exploded inward with a deafening crack.
Not broken, but shattered, splintered like kindling. 3. We dove for the hole. We scrambled out, throwing ourselves into the mud, ignoring the pain of scraped knees and elbows. We didn't look back. We just ran toward the thickest part of the woods, the main logging road, our only hope. We heard the roar, a sound that was pure throat and muscle, a sonic wave that felt like it hit the air out of our lungs. It was triumphant. It wasn't the sound of an injured animal. It was the sound of a hunter who had just cornered his prey. We ran blindly, fueled by pure adrenaline, until we hit the first paved road. We didn't slow down, didn't look over our shoulders. We just kept running until we collapsed near a deserted pull-off, our lungs burning, gasping for air that tasted clean and mercifully neutral. We thought we had escaped. We thought the speed and the daylight were enough.
We just saw a shadow retreat into the woods as we reached the asphalt. An impossible shape, moving far too quickly, far too silently. And then I felt the heat in my hand. I looked down. Clutched in my palm was Natalia's wedding ring. She wore it constantly, never took it off. It was heavy gold. It was warm. It hadn't just watched us run. It had stopped us before we reached the road, placed the ring in my hand, and let us go. As a warning, as a promise. We hadn't escaped the woods. We had simply moved the hunting ground, and the game was far from over. If you want to know what happened next, the desperate final confrontation, and the terrifying truth about where this thing came from, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Trust me, you don't want to be in the dark when we finish this nightmare. I thought the cold air was the worst thing in the world. I was wrong.
The worst thing was the sound of the mill settling around us, the slow, groaning decay of wet wood and rusted gears, a sound that masked everything else. It made us deaf, blind, and stupid. We were deep inside the abandoned structure, the place reeking of old copper and ozone, the kind of smell you get when blood and iron sit together for decades. Natalia was clutching my arm so tight I could feel her nails digging into my forearm, tiny pinpricks of pain. Caio was ahead, flashlight beam jumping nervously. It stopped. Caio whispered, his voice thin, swallowed instantly by the vast, suffocating silence of the place. We'd been running hard for 15 minutes since he chased us out of the dense pines. The sound had been massive, heavy, tearing footsteps, followed by a grunt that felt more like a chest cough than an animal roar. It hadn't been hunting us, it had been driving us exactly here.
Hal didn't say it out loud, but the fear had a metallic flavor now, coating my throat. We weren't trapped, we were contained. Caio lifted the beam higher. It hit the support pillar, and that's when the reality fractured completely. The scratchers weren't random claw marks, not like those we saw on the deer carcasses. These were organized, deep gashes running vertically, crossed by shorter horizontal lines, repeating a specific, jagged pattern. They weren't animal marks. They looked like desperate, angry tally marks. Raul, Natalia breathed, pulling me backward. We need to leave, now. I couldn't move. I stared at the pillar. How long had it been here? Why was it marking time? It wasn't just killing for food. It was keeping track. The air shifted. It didn't get colder, but it got heavier, like standing at the bottom of a pool. My eardrums pressurized, and the gentle, rhythmic drip of water that had been our only company suddenly ceased. Absolute silence.
The kind that screams. Caio swung the flashlight around fast, the beam slicing through the dust motes. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Hear what? Nothing?" I retorted, my heart hammering against my ribs, a dull, panicked drum. "Exactly," he hissed. The dripping stopped, and thwomp. The sick, heavy door we'd slipped through, the one with the rusted latch, slammed shut. Not with a rattle, not with a creak, with a definitive, brutal thwomp of mass meeting mass. We spun around, our collective breath vanishing. The darkness that had been friendly enough now pressed against my retinas, viscous and suffocating. "Wind," Natalia whispered, though her tone betrayed her.
No wind inside the sealed room, Natalia, Caio shot back, raising his old hunting rifle, his hands shaking so badly the barrel danced. I ran to the door. The latch, even if I could reach it in the dark, was bent outward, mangled.
I felt the rough texture of the wood, and then the deep gouges beside the frame. Fresh wood scent mixed with the pungent decay. The marks were higher than any bear could reach. They weren't made from the outside. It hadn't slammed the door shut. It had pushed it closed from the inside. It had been waiting for us to enter. It was already in the room. We froze, 3 figures huddled in the center of the vast echoing space, surrounded by the invisible menace. The absolute lack of sound was the terror itself. It felt like the earth holding its breath before swallowing us whole. Then came the sound. Not a growl, not a screech. It was a wet, shallow inhalation, right beside Natalia's ear. She didn't scream. She inhaled sharply, a high, thin whistle of pure panic, and then her knees buckled. She didn't fall. She simply collapsed into the paralysis of pure shock. I yanked her backward, just as a blur of shadow detached itself from the stacked machinery 20 feet away.
It was bigger than I could have imagined, taller than the door, its head almost scraping the low-hanging rafters. The sheer, overwhelming bulk of it was a physical blow. It smelled like a slaughterhouse, mixed with something burnt, something acrid and sickeningly familiar. Sulfur. Its outline was wrong, too lean for its height, too broad across the shoulders. Its posture was not quadrupedal, but horrifyingly upright, like a massive, starving man wrapped in ragged, midnight black fur. Caio didn't hesitate. He wasn't trained, he wasn't brave, but the adrenaline took over. He aimed the rifle at the center mass and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the confined space, a white flash. The acrid smell of gunpowder briefly dominated the sulfur. The creature didn't flinch. The impact of the slug, a heavy deer load, was met with a sickening thud and a spray of something dark and viscous, but the movement only caused the creature to pause for half a second.
It didn't register pain. It registered annoyance. Then it moved. Not a lunge. It was too fast for a lunge. It was a teleportation. A massive shadow dissolving the space between us. It aimed for Caio. I saw the long curving claws, thick and black as obsidian. They didn't just scratch, they tore. The sound of canvas, Caio's heavy hunting jacket, ripping, was instantly followed by the awful, wet tearing of muscle and sinew. Caio's scream was cut short. He dropped the rifle, his body arching backward in an impossible arc. When he hit the floor, he was quiet. Natalia finally found her voice, a raw, primal noise that belonged in a nightmare. The creature didn't look at us. It stood over Caio's motionless body for a horrifying second, its massive snout lowered. I could see the teeth now too numerous, too sharp, like shards of porcelain. And the eyes were the worst. They weren't dog eyes, not yellow or mindless.
They were black, deathless, and they shone with terrifying, cold intelligence. They analyzed, they judged. I grabbed Natalia's hand. "Run, now!" I didn't aim for the main door, that was blocked. I pulled her toward the dark corridor leading to the old press machinery, the path where a dogman wouldn't easily fit. We stumbled through the darkness, scraping our shins on rusted rail tracks, ignoring the pain. I could hear the thing behind us. Not running, it was pacing. A heavy, methodical step thump, giving us just enough distance to feel hope before immediately stealing it back. We burst into a narrow processing chamber. The light from a tiny, filthy window high up barely illuminated the scene.
In the center was the massive, silent hydraulic press, jaws wide open, waiting for wood that would never come. Dead end. We were panting, tasting iron and panic. The step thumb stopped just outside the doorway. Then the breathing resumed, deep, raspy, humid.
He looked frenetically for my way out. There was only the press, and the small rusty inspection panel set high into the brick wall, maybe 4 feet across. Impossible to climb without something sturdy. Natalia was weeping silently now, leaning against the cold brick. "I'm sorry," I managed, fumbling for the small, heavy wrench I kept in my pack. "I shouldn't have brought you." I held the wrench like it was a sword, facing the dark doorway. I knew it was useless. It was a spoon against the dragon. But I had to buy time. The dog man stepped into the light. It moved slowly this time, savoring the moment. I saw the dark fluid dripping from its claws, Caillou's blood, hitting the dusty concrete with slow, measured blips, its head tilted, observing us. It wasn't hungry right now. It was performing. I tensed, ready to rush forward, ready for the useless fight. When the impossible happened, it stopped tilting its head. Its lips peeled back from those terrible teeth, revealing dark gums. The air in the room grew thick with saliva, its fetid breath hitting me even from across the room. And then it spoke. Wasn't a growl, wasn't a roar. It was a grotesque, broken sound, like a tape recorder playing human speech backward and forwards at once. But the words were clear. The meaning was devastating. Run, roll. My name. The attacks didn't stop because it wasn't an animal. It had been listening. It had been learning our names. It didn't want to just kill us. It wanted us to know why. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. This wasn't a monster. It was a predator perfecting its hunt. In that half second of paralyzing horror, I saw my chance. I swung the wrench with everything I had, not at the beast, but at the enormous hydraulic press beside me. The wrench hit the main hydraulic switch with a sickening crack. The machinery groaned to life.
Immense, terrível metálico shriek filled the chamber as massive, rusted plates of the press began to slide toward each other. A criatura hesitou, e os black eyes snapping from me to the machine. Ela entendia danger. Eu cravei Natalia, using the noisy and its brief confusion to sprint toward the inspection panel. A prensa estava fechando, its scream drowning out everything else. A beast regained focus. It lunged, not roaring, but letting out a sound of pure, intelligent frustration. Eu empurrei Natalia, screaming at her to climb. Ela scrambled desperately, grabbing the rusted lip of the panel. Eu olhei para baixo. A criatura estava a meus pés. I could smell the hot, fetid musk of its body. Dei Natalia uma última empurrada, just as the jaws of the hydraulic press came together, with a final, echoing crachunk that shook the foundation of the mill, whose song covered the next sound. The impact of the dogman's claws raking across my calf, a flash of blinding, white-hot agony.
My boot filled instantly with warmth, but I was moving. I climbed through the panel, scrambling out, pulling Natalia after me. We tumbled out onto a ledge 30 feet above the ground, the cold night air hitting my face like a blessing. Below us, the mill was silent again, save for the rhythmic, terrified gasps of Natalia and myself. We didn't look back. We didn't stop running until the sun began to paint the horizon gray. I made it out. Natalia made it out. But we left Caio behind. And we left something else there too. This certainty that we were the dominant species. I'm sitting here now, the wounds stitched, the nightmares running in a loop. The authorities called it a large canine attack, maybe an extremely aggressive wolf hybrid.
They filed the report and closed the case. They didn't see the scratches on the pillar, and they didn't hear the sound. I hear it every time the house is quiet. Not the growl, but the mimicry. The broken, learning word.
Because his attacks no stopped. He just move on to the next lesson. And the dogman knows my name. Do you still think that shadow in your peripheral vision is just a trick of the light? Do you think those scratches on your back door were made by a stray dog? If these stories keep you awake, then you know the truth. Subscribe and stay tuned. We have so many more nights ahead of us.